Hi, guys.
David.
Movie's great. I'll just jump right in. How did having done the play on stage help you with creating these characters on screen?
I mean, it allowed us to come into the movie feeling like we did a large chunk of the work already. So there's a relaxation that comes from that. The flip side of that coin is that you find yourself being so comfortable that you don't want to miss anything. You know, you still have to be open to whatever newness comes through.
What's, for Tuc or Matt, what are some things about your character that you hope people will notice on screen that they may have missed watching it on stage?
Well, I think both Matt and I had characters that observed and bore witness to some of the horrors that were going on. And when you're on stage living that and witnessing it, to do it justice, those reactions are very small if they're authentic. But somehow on a stage in front of 1,000 people, you have to figure out how to send that to the back row. So I think the transition to film really served characters like ours, because there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of nonverbal communication that is more easily seen and captured by an editor in a film.
I'll just add on to that and say, I agree with what Tuc's saying, but also I felt like there were intricacies in Donald's relationship with Michael that came to light on film in a way that they didn't on stage. And I almost feel like they wouldn't have been able to come to life the way they did on film if we hadn't done the stage production before it. Because it's not something that Jim and I spoke about at any length. It just sort of happened as we were filming. And they were little things and little behaviors and nuances and looks and things like that that just for whatever reason in this medium, they came across more clearly.
This is a question for all three of you. Given that this show was such a limited run on Broadway, what does it mean to you that like young queer people can see this like LGBT classic being performed by all-out actors like across the world now?
You know, a lot of people have commented through social media and people we see in real life who say, "Oh, I'm so sad I didn't get to see that show. That would have meant the world to me." Well, the good news is the film adaptation is really true to the stage production, to the original script, to the updated script. So what you see on film is very similar to what we did on Broadway.
Oh, sorry. Continue, Matt. Sorry.
Sorry. No, please.
Please. No, I was just going to ask for Robin or for any of you, what's the best piece of insight that Mart Crowley gave you about your character over the course of this whole process?
For me, it wasn't something specific that Mart said. It was just Mart's way of being. Mart being in his 80s, living his best life, showing up to every party early, being joyous, being happy, loving being celebrated and getting what he deserved after so many years of working his tail off.
Matt, what were you going to say before? Sorry I cut you off.
Well, I'll answer that one instead, maybe, because it was a bigger discussion. And I agree with what Robin said. I would say Mart's presence was his greatest gift to me on this, for sure. And I've said this to these boys before, but you know, this is a piece about a generation of men who don't have role models, and Mart ended up becoming the greatest role model you could hope to have as a gay man. And we love him and we miss him. I would say that some of the greatest insight into my character, though, I was able to have lunch with William Friedkin before we started rehearsals, and he ordered cracked crab at the restaurant we were at.
No, that's amazing.
Perfect. And he gave me some insight into the world of the piece and the characters and the actors who originated these roles so courageously back in the 60s. So I would say a lot of the great insight I had came from him and, of course, Joe Mantello.
How did having done the play on stage help you with creating your characters on screen?
There's just an unintended depth that comes from doing a play for 4 months together and then reuniting a year later to continue digging into who these characters are and how they relate to one another. So it's almost reflexive, the familiarity, the freedom, the camaraderie, and the joy that comes from having shared the Broadway run, and then coming back to it all. It was surprising how easy and quickly how easy it was to get back into the rhythms of the piece and to the rhythms of the characters. Yeah, it's such a unique experience. I've never had anything like this happen. And I kind of want every experience to be like this, actually. Just do a play and then make a movie of it. Sounds pretty ideal.
What about you, Charlie?
Well, I agree with everything Zach said, and I'll add to it that thank goodness we had Joe Mantello there to kind of guide us in that adjustment. I think everybody really did take what they'd found for themselves and what we built together from New York to Los Angeles. But you know, there definitely was that, for me anyway, that moment of where I lacked a little bit of faith about how that performance could translate. And Joe gave us that sense of confidence and belief, and was just such a wonderful director.
What's something about your characters that you hope people will notice on screen that might have gotten lost on stage?
Well, I do feel like the joy of making a movie is the subtlety and the invitation that we're able to extend for the audience to come into the work, rather than in the theater where it's our job to bring the work to the audience. So for me, playing a character who relishes the notion that the world should come to him, it felt really delightful, and it felt like the playground was a little bit more populated with toys. You know, there were so many amazing props around, and we had an amazing props department, an amazing production designer, Judy Becker, and you know, all of the things that we got to play with, the lighters, the drinks, the glasses, the magazines, the things that were lying around the apartment, you know, all that granular detail makes it so much more delightful to play in that world. You know, not to say that it's not delightful to play on stage, but it's just a different kind of sandbox. What can I say? To mix and drive metaphors into the ground. So.
What does it mean to both of you that young queer people can see this classic of LGBT literature being performed by an entirely young company on Netflix?
It's a classic, therefore it's good for you. No, I don't know. I'd heard about the boys of the band. I'd flipped through it trying to find a monologue in high school. I remember, well, I ended up seeing the movie and not quite understanding the importance of the lineage that really came from it. And that sounds like a little bit of spinach, you know, that's not going to get anybody super excited about this. But I do think the work speaks for itself. I think that the writing speaks for itself. These characters are so endearing and suffer in such human ways that you watch it, and what the reward of it is just feeling this connection to, I don't know, our community and our history, but also a sort of spirit that it clearly existed in 1968 and must exist now, as somebody who experiences it, reading it and performing in it and watching it.
Also, Charlie wears a mesh shirt. So young people should be inspired by that as well.
Yeah, I think that points were made.
This is for all of you. How did having done the play on stage help you building your characters for the screen version?
I don't think any of us would disagree that it was unlike any experience we'd had before. I mean, you do as much homework, quote unquote, as you can on any role, so you're prepared and ready to jump as soon as they say action. And this one, not only have we spent a bunch of time with it, but we'd lived in these roles so long, you could never do that kind of homework otherwise. You were allowed to be more playful and experimental than I would ever have been brave enough to be otherwise, because I had so much knowledge behind me.
I mean, I feel like I'm a pretty low key actor on stage anyway. And so then taking this to film was really interesting, just to trust in that, you know, sometimes on stage in front of 800 people, you don't know if you're just thinking something or trying not to overdo something that it's going to get through and it's going to be seen in the mezzanine. But in a film, it's all right there. You just think something and it really is, you know, it's right there in the lens. So it was kind of freeing in a way to just kind of sit back and let a lot of the stuff go and just kind of like strip this down to the essence.
Yeah, I think I spent most of the 15 weeks that we were on Broadway dealing with the demons inside of me and what does this mean and what am I playing and what are we doing and what is this about? So that we got through all that by the time Joe said action on the first day of principal photography. For me, it was just play, have fun, go to a birthday party, stay in the birthday party until it turns, you know. You kind of get caught into playing the end of the play every night, but this was just stay present and listen.
What was the best piece of insight that Mark gave you about your character throughout this whole process? Maybe Michael or Brian, you want to start this off, since they told me to direct this to people.
Yeah, well, one of the great things that Mark taught me was that, you know, Bernard is based on somebody from his past, and it was a young man that he, you know, was quite smitten with that got a lot of shit for being, looking like he floated off the cover of one of the white glossy magazines. And I was like, wow, that image just was so specific for me, especially for New York. And that he was always a little too perfect because he couldn't afford to be, he couldn't show the ragged edges, which makes the phone call and all of that stuff so moving for Mart, he said.
We sort of discussed who this was based on, and something I can never really share, I guess, but it was so amazing to, you know, just have him give any insight about what I was doing there and why, and the mystery surrounding Alan's character, and the fact that he very much wanted there to be the question of, is he or isn't he? You know, when people see the play and afterwards, that there's no clear-cut answer, but it leaves a lot up to interpretation.
Jim, what does it mean to you that young queer people can see this like classic of LGBT literature, theater, being performed by an all-ad company on screen now?
Well, you know, from listening to the tales, both reading about it and hearing from people who had to squirrel away copies of this movie or secretly see this, you know, many years ago, the fact that we're on a platform that's so much more easily accessible to people, that's very moving to me, that the world has just changed in that way, and that, you know, progress will not be stopped sometimes. And I just hope that, well, I don't know what I hope. I think it makes me happy, and I hope they really like it. I'm sorry, that's a shitty answer.
It's a good enough answer, but I appreciate all of your time.
Hard question.
I know. Joe, the movie's great.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear the music.
It must have been like an embarrassment of riches or something to be able to rehearse the cast, do the whole thing on Broadway, rehearse again, and then film it. Tell me about that whole experience for you.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible, and you know, sometimes rehearsal for a film is frowned upon, but I thought that it would be really, really useful because, you know, one of my heroes is Sidney Lumet, and Sidney always rehearsed a film before he did it. And because he came from the theater, he would kind of tape out the location, you know, to scale, and he would rehearse with the actors. And it's just it's a process that I'm most comfortable with, you know. And I know a lot of people want to capture the kind of spontaneity that you can get by just kind of, you know, diving in, but I found it really, really useful.
Tell me about, had Mark seen it before he died? Can you talk about his reaction a bit?
Yeah, he certainly chimed in about the screenplay, because we were working from his original screenplay, and then we made our changes and additions and subtractions based on that. But we followed the structure pretty closely. And then we had him for a week in Los Angeles. He was on the soundstage with us, and, you know, he sat next to me and watched the monitors, and got to walk the set. And, you know, he was just completely in heaven and kind of, in disbelief that this had happened to him twice, that the original cast and this particular cast were then made a film of it. So, and then I don't know if you noticed, but he's got a little tiny, you can't call it a cameo. He's in the background in one of the shots in Julius Bar, because we wanted him to be a real part of this forever.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
And he must have been thrilled that it was an all-out cast and creative team bringing this to the screen this time.
I think so. I think he was. I think he's a really generous guy. And he was, I don't know, we couldn't get enough of him.
What insights did the actors have doing the film version that they hadn't had on stage? Like, did you notice anything in particular about any of the ways they picked up the characters?
I mean, I think something happens when you go through an entire run of a Broadway play. There are certain rhythms and certain feelings and textures and moments that ingrain themselves in you. And then even better, when you have about a year away from that, it becomes so organic. And this is what I noticed most, is that what they were doing on the film set was so organic and so effortless. And I think that only comes with time and the experience of having done it for, a Broadway run.
Joe, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. It's great to see you.
Yeah, I hope to see you in person eventually.
Yeah, I hope so, God.
Be well.
Care.
You too.
You too.